Thank you, Paige, and thank you, MFA. I'm pleased to be here with you to talk about the relationship between Rachel Ruysch's work, the history of flower painting in the Netherlands, and the market for both flowers and paintings in the Netherlands in the 17th century. Probably because of my day job, I'm in the middle of teaching the survey of art from prehistoric to the Gothic period. I'm going to start the history of flower painting a little bit farther back than you might expect, all the way to the Minoan period in the second millennium before the Common Era. This wall painting is from the island of Thera, now called Santorini, and it always surprises students because it is a radical change from the art of the other cultures of this period. It's not about warfare or domination or overt religious devotion, at least as far as we can tell. And the choice to depict a colorful landscape and the flowers that grow from it suggests a society at ease with the degree of comfort in their lives that allows for the contemplation of beauty. We don't know much else about that, but it's very much creates that effect. Prominent flowers in ancient art is not that common, but they appear again in the Areopagus Augusti, a monument celebrating the reign of Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Flowers appear in the image in the earth goddess, up here, excuse me, and in a stylized flourish that wraps around the base of the entire structure. The presence of the flowers here underlines the peace made possible, according to the message of this monument, by Augustus's rule, as well as the plenty that comes with peace. And actually, if you get closer to the object, hidden among the leaves and the flowers are tiny animals, birds and insects and lizards and things like that, to emphasize that sense of sort of natural abundance. Coming closer to Rachel Ruysch's time, the flowers adorn the Hours of Catherine of Cleves. Books of Hours were personal, deluxe prayer books, largely created for the aristocracy. The expanse of creamy vellum around the texts and illustrations offered space for artists to fill with marginal flourishes, often comical but floral as well. Here, the twisting stems and colorful blossoms seem to bind Catherine, kneeling on the left, to the Virgin Mary and Christ child, the object of her devotion in the center. The flowers are also associated with the Virgin Mary through symbolism, but the decoration, engrossing but entirely unnecessary to the subject, also represents a luxurious addition to an already luxurious item. That's also the case with the flowers in the Unicorn Tapestry and Sandro Botticelli's Primavera. In their profusion, they similarly relate not only to the sense of luxury, but also well-being and fertility, as is very much the case in the Primavera, where we have the goddess Flora in the center, surrounded by scenes of beauty and generation. Here we're looking at the very large Portinari altarpiece by the Flemish painter Hugo van der Goes, which features 2 bouquets of flowers in the foreground. More than decorative, the flowers are also symbolic. The 3 carnations relate to the nails on the cross, the columbines reference the Holy Spirit, the violets humility, and the lilies and irises the Passion of Christ. In addition, all the flowers have medicinal properties, which would have been recognizable to people looking at this. So they're less of a fun addition, more of a central element in the image, mediating between the viewers and the holy figures. We can sort of imagine ourselves right in that foreground location, just in front of the figure of the Christ child. And they offer an earthly manifestation of Christ's presence that is accentuated by the medicinal power of the flowers as well. A contemporary of Hugo van der Goes is Hans Memling, and his jug of flowers suddenly feels very modern. It looks almost like the kind of thing that Rachel Ruysch was doing. They're isolated in a fictive space. They're standing in a bouquet. However, the flowers, irises, columbine, and lilies, again, all relate to the Virgin Mary. And the jug bears Christ's initials. And it's actually intended to function, it's the reverse of a portrait painting of a man. That is the companion to that portrait is now missing, but it originally would have been a virgin and child, like the one that I've added here. So it was the painting, the flower painting, remains a function of the religious content of the artwork. The 16th century saw more independent works. This artist, whoopsie, nope, we're good. Oh, I wasn't going for, oh, there we are, sorry. This painter, Ludger Tom Ring, was from Münster in Germany and worked in Braunschweig, although he spent some time in the Netherlands as well. And he painted mostly portraits and flowers, so very much secular imagery, and possibly related to his own status as a Reformed. He was a Protestant painter, as we'll talk about in a minute. The significance of that. And so he painted a number of bouquets like this one, and they often include these, or they always entirely include these native flowers, like we're seeing here, like roses, gillyflowers, marigolds, daisies, violets, and rosemary. Another painter of flowers from the 16th century is this Flemish artist, Joris Hoefnagel. He was a manuscript painter, primarily working on a miniature scale, who moved in intellectual circles. He worked for the Emperor Rudolph II in Prague as a manuscript illuminator, as well as some other royal types. And this is typical for his paintings in general. He liked to include, he liked to depict tiny animals very carefully, and also in this case, a flower. And it's particularly nice because he has dedicated this image to his mother. These intermittent depictions of flowers that occurred in the 16th century are followed by a sudden burst of flower paintings around 1600 that are started with this is our first known, signed, and dated painting in the Dutch context. It is by Roeland Savaray. And he takes, in many ways, it's the same ideas as what we see in Hoefnagel's manuscript painting, but he's making it into much more of a normal sight that you could see, a bunch of flowers in a vase with sitting in a stone niche instead of against this very plain white background. Although he does include insects and lizards that I don't think most of us have in our homes. To understand this surge of interest in the subject, we need to address some historical background. What was it that caused this sudden uptick in the amount of floral paintings? So, map time. Before 1566, the Netherlands was part of the Spanish Empire, and that was under Charles V and Philip II of Spain. Charles V was the heir of many different crowned heads, and he ended up inheriting just this huge kingdom. And he was very strongly Catholic, and then as was his son, Philip II, who took over from him. And when the Reformation began in Germany with the ideas of Martin Luther, and then continued in France and Switzerland with the further modifications of John Calvin, they were very much, they suppressed his writings. They did not want their writings. They did not want Calvinist or Lutheran ideas in the Netherlands. The ideas filtered in nonetheless. I mean, they're really close to Germany. And ultimately, the desire for religious change combined with the desire to throw off the Spanish, who were, ruling from afar and didn't understand the Northern European world. And in 1566, the Netherlands revolted, throwing off Spanish rule and beginning the 80 Years' War. The Spanish were ultimately able to retake the southern Netherlands, and that is what we now call Belgium. So that is down below here. But the northern Netherlands was able to became an independent country, actually for its first time in its history, because it had always been part of some other larger kingdom. And it was also the first republic that had existed since the Republic of Florence, and so it was called the Dutch Republic. It was officially Calvinist, and which meant that it did not, a number of things, but one of the most important ones was for artists was that they did not, Calvinists did not believe in the presence of religious art inside a church. You could have stories, historical stories from the Bible in your home, but there's not going to be anything inside the church. So there was other considerable impacts that came from this change. One was there was a movement of the market from Antwerp to Amsterdam. So Antwerp was the main harbor in the southern Netherlands in what is now Belgium. And it had been experiencing massive growth since 1500. It was a major trading center, particularly for sugar coming in from the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. It also had a strong banking industry and a stock exchange, and overall accounted for about 40% of the world trade at that time. It also, because of that, had a very large merchant class. But the conflict between the Spanish and the Dutch meant that the port of Antwerp was closed. Now Amsterdam, so it was the next town up we'll just go back to the map and show you where that is. So there is Antwerp right here, and then just the next closest place was to berth your ship was in Amsterdam. So it became the beneficiary for all of the ships that then were coming into that town, but also a number of people who felt no longer at home in the southern Netherlands, largely because of their religious ideas. This included Calvinists, but also Mennonites and Lutherans, and so people who just needed to leave. Many of these were important artists and intellectuals who then found new homes for themselves and really transformed the art world in the northern Netherlands, which had always been a little bit of the sleepy neighbors, northern neighbors of the southern Netherlands. But as I alluded to before, another result of this change was that for artists, that there was this elimination of religious commissions for them. And if we look at this painting by Henrik Steenwijk, it's not a real place that he's depicting here. It's sort of just a sort of imaginary interior of a Gothic church, but you can see that it's filled with altarpieces, as many Catholic churches are, especially in Europe, are to this day. And we can contrast that with this painting by Peter Sonredam, a Dutch artist, depicting the interior of a Calvinist church. And you can see that there's no art visible here at all. We do have some little things up in the corner there, framed things. Those are coats of arms of people who were buried below. Otherwise, the emphasis here is on the word of God that is being spoken by the priest, the minister in the middle of the painting who is giving a sermon. So unless you wanted to perhaps paint this scene, as Sonredam did, there's no way to include a painting in this church. So that really left artists with somewhat less of an outlet for their art making. So what happens? Well, we still have a lot of money floating around. So there's still all of this capital that has come to Amsterdam. There's all of this just money coming in as a result of the trade. So there is a desire for art that continues. And essentially what happens is that a lot of the characteristics that we can see inside what used to be sort of a standard painting kind of gets broken out into a variety of different individual genres, such as still life. And within still life, of course, there's many different subcategories of still life. The one we're interested in, of course, is flower painting, but you can see there's a little vase with flowers in the back there. But you could imagine also a still life, a breakfast still life coming from that as well. And even also a landscape off in the distance, and then even also a genre painting of a mother and child. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the Christ child and the Virgin Mary, as we see here. And that is exactly what happens, that this burst of productivity takes place, and people, it seemed like everybody had a painting in the Dutch Republic. This is a painting by Quirijn Breckelinckam that is in the Worcester Art Museum, so worth a trip out to see that and other gems there, that shows a bunch of tailors sitting around on a table that's lifting them up so that they have a better light coming in through that window. But what's interesting for us is that there's a painting in the background, hanging on the wall there. So apparently this fairly humble group of people still have money to have a painting. At the same time, we have Johannes Vermeer's concert, which sadly we cannot go see because this is one of the ones that was stolen, but it shows some very elegant upper middle class people having a music lesson, and behind them is some fancy paintings that would have been sold for a much higher price. So there were sort of many price points for the paintings, and found almost everywhere. Foreigners were marked upon it when they came to the Netherlands, and millions of paintings were created during this century, many of which are now lost, but many of which are here, it seems, in the MFA. So if we return to Roland Savarai's painting, we can look at it in comparison to Tom Ring's painting, sort of before and after this shift of capital that took place between Antwerp and the Netherlands, or the Dutch Republic. We can see that the effect of a fresh spring bouquet that Tom Ring is creating is replaced with something that is much more complex. So there's still insects and animals, and the flowers include some familiar species like a rose, but we also have a shell that is included down below, and a tulip, a red and yellow tulip, as well as, I guess that's the chief thing that is included there. So this is no longer about the religious symbolism, as in the Memling or the Vaanderhus. And it's also not necessarily to adorn an already beautiful subject like the Book of Hours, or to create a sense, maybe it also does this, but it has another agenda besides simply creating a sense of peace and well-being. The flowers have moved to the center, and they're all from different seasons. And probably most significant is they include rare and expensive specimens. And the shell in the foreground clarifies its function. This artwork is both about collecting and made for the purpose of collecting. So it's something that you would add to your collection. Collecting originated from aristocratic practices, starting around the mid-15th century. The wealth that crown, princely types had enabled them to obtain important and beautiful objects. And their ability to display them in their large homes and understand them as a connoisseur enhanced their status as rulers. Here, a fictional princely collection is depicted alongside the story about Alexander the Great and his appreciation for his court painter, Apelles. So, but around him are any number of paintings from many different sources, many specific, not fictional paintings that are gathered here together to indicate that sort of great power and wealth of this sort of fictional collector. In Antwerp, before the war, the surge in wealth and objects coming from the port of the rest of the world made collecting available to the middle class. You could look aristocratic, filling your walls with paintings, all while still being a merchant. And these collecting practices continue in the southern Netherlands, as obviously here from this dated 1620, but they also come to the Dutch Republic with the religious refugees. So the fad for collecting becomes very strong in the Netherlands, in the Dutch Republic. And that includes not only inert objects like paintings and shells, but also came to include what could be grown in the garden as well. So we don't often think about that as the garden as the site of a collection, but that was very much the case at this time. So in the previous centuries, gardens were mostly confined to monasteries and castles. Of course, everybody had a kitchen garden where they grew vegetables and things like that, but this idea of having sort of a more formal garden was something that you only found in those contexts of the monastery or the castle. And their purpose was in terms of usefulness. They were often laid out in quadrangles, as you can see here, in relation to their function medicinally. The rise of humanism in Europe in the 15th century brought a new interest in botany that was fed by an influx of plant samples that was coming in from global trade. And this is when we start to see the founding of botanical gardens. There's one founded earlier in Pisa, but this one is still in situ in Padua, founded in 1545. And in the 16th century, more plants were introduced into Europe than had been in the previous 2 millennia, 20 times more plants, new plants. So the kind of the European flowers like the ones depicted by Ludger Tom Ring, like roses and lilies and carnations and violets, were displaced by the new exotic flowers from the rest of the known world. The earliest botanical garden in the Dutch Republic was founded in 1590 in Leiden, which was also home to its oldest university. And so this is what we are seeing here, an engraving of that botanical garden. I assume they did not have an alligator walking around, but probably a stuffed one alongside there. And they installed as the first director of the Leiden Botanical Garden a man sort of from the northern part of France near Belgium, Charles Lecluse, who is known by his humanist Latin name Clusius. And he was a renowned botanist with a vast network of fellow flower and plant enthusiasts, including Joris Hoefnagel, who we saw earlier. Through that network, he was given some tulip seeds and bulbs, and tulips had in fact been mentioned in European botanical writings starting in 1561, so that was finally it had filtered to him. Tulips were native to Turkey, and their cultivation and breeding were encouraged by the Ottoman Empire. The Turks favored tulips with elegant pointed petals, and they appear in many contexts, such as this prayer rug. So you can there's the two tulip areas there and a close-up there of the tulips included in there. Clusius grew the first tulips in the Netherlands, in turn sharing seeds and bulbs with his friends and fellow flower lovers from around the Netherlands, both north and south. And here is our friends again from the double portrait. These fellow lovers of flowers were called liefhebbers, which is a general Dutch term that was applied to the connoisseurship of a variety of different things, but these were flower liefhebbers. And so the passion for tulips grew, and some people grew frustrated that he wasn't sharing, that Clusius wasn't sharing more with them. And actually, some of them broke into the Leiden Botanical Garden and stole a bunch of bulbs, and then shared them amongst the fellow liefhebbers, and that helped the flowers enter broader circulation and get people more excited about them. So what exactly was the appeal of tulips? I mean, they're lovely, right? But, it's sort of like, why are we so very excited about tulips? And the reason for that was both aesthetic and scientific, which kind of put them in that sweet spot for collecting, that they had this sort of variety of different ways in which they could be appreciated. Also, as unlike a medal or a shell, you could give bulbs to your friends after they bloomed, and then they would sort of create a little bulblet next to it, and you could nurture that and give that away to a friend. You could also give seeds. The seeds took a lot longer to become actually blooming flowers, but you could give them as well. So they were sort of spontaneously generating and created this possibility for this very sociable exchange of flowers and amongst everybody, your in crowd of fellow liefhebbers of the tulip. Among liefhebbers, gift exchange was the honorable means of expanding your collection. You could trade with other people or give a gift and then get another gift back. But inevitably, money began to be exchanged for the tulip bulbs as well. So it was too tempting. They were too desirable. And so we begin to see the cost of these individual bulbs begin to rise. So they are also very beautiful as well. And while they appeared fresh from the ground, new each year to the pre-evolutionary thinking of that time period, they were also as old as the world. So they didn't think about when they evolved. They just thought, God had made them, and there they were, freshly growing from the ground each time, each spring, just for them. But the other thing that was exciting about tulips was their variegation. So it kind of added a little bit of a sense of gambling into the whole experience of owning a tulip. And that quality of gambling, which we all know is so very addictive, contributed to the desirability of these flowers. So the variegation was called flaming, or striping, or feathering. And one of the reasons that it was a bit of a gamble is that it could actually disappear. You could have a beautifully feathered, flamed tulip that would then, the next year when it bloomed, would just be a boring old red or yellow or something like that. So it was this kind of, crapshoot, shall we say, of whether or not it was going to come out like that. The reason for the flaming was a virus was what was causing it. They discovered that, though, only towards the end of the 19th century, and now all of the flaming and other effects that we see in tulips are bred into them, so that doesn't happen to us anymore. The flaming notched into a category of that people already appreciated during this time was that variegation was also something that could be seen in other in stones, for instance, like jasper. And this is a gold-mounted and enameled jasper-covered bowl that was in a Kunst, the sort of thing that would be in a Kunstkammer, one of these collections that people would have of artistic objects. And although it's not exactly the same in terms of the striping, that sort of natural way in which the colors are blending and molding was something that people were very drawn to, and the flowers produced that same kind of effect. So this aspect of chance in the tulips was one of the things that made them very thrilling. Let's see. So it was also very important to speak knowledgeably about the flowers and to be able to discern the best types. Because of the way that people thought about these objects, they didn't plant them in the kind of density that we are used to. And this is a photograph that I took at the Keukenhof in the Netherlands. It's this huge garden full of flower bulbs that's really fun to visit if you ever happen to be in the Netherlands during that time. And this is how we are used to seeing tulips planted, all very close to each other and kind of wowing us with the density of the image. And I have to confess, I took this picture, I think in part because I was sort of homesick and I liked the Dunkin' Donuts like pink and orange color together. Anyway, that's not how people looked at their tulips. This engraving shows how the flowers were planted much more sparsely so that you could enjoy them in their individual identities. And then they also tracked their precious flowers with garden books and maps, and would commission artists to create portraits of their best tulips, so that they could have them in a just gathered together in a book like this one. That most of these were done by, Jacob Marl. There was a great deal of overlap between art buyers and tulip buyers, so that collecting urge is present there plenty. So beyond just sort of the idea of seeing these flowers in their beauty, there were some other potential meanings to the paintings. One of them was the idea of them relating to vanitas, which is the idea that it comes from the Old Testament, vanitas, vanitas vanitatum, which means all life is vanity, but sort of like smoke, it just will disappear. You can't take it with you. So a lot of art from the Dutch period has been interpreted as having that kind of vanitas significance. And it's very overt in this painting by Jacob de Geen, where we have a skull in the middle and a soap bubble above it that is imminently going to burst. We have some smoke coming out of this vase on one side, some money that is the kind of thing you can't take with you, and an expensive tulip on the other side that, sure, you can enjoy it now, but it's going to be wilted very soon. However, it's hard to see much in the way of warning about the brevity of life in most other tulip paintings and flower paintings. Contemporary poems on floral paintings pretty much praise them for just making it possible for flowers to endure longer. That was what they liked about them. But the depictions of the bouquets that we're seeing here were largely fictional. it was just simply too expensive to cut your beautiful prize flowers and bring them in and put them in a vase, which they may not survive. They lasted longer outside. And also the flowers themselves would have flopped over. I don't know. Every time I make a bouquet, they're always like, so it's the same thing that would have happened here as well. But this, and they also didn't have floral foam to make their bouquets stand up in the way that we can more easily. So all of these the paintings were pretty much based on sketches, individual sketches that an artist would do from life and then reuse over and over again in their paintings with whatever degree of variety variations they might want to include to them. The art historian Paul Taylor refers to these paintings as horticultural wish fulfillment. It's just this delightful image in front of you. It also, what we're seeing here, as if it were a bouquet that you actually were owning, all of that would be incredibly expensive. Flowers themselves were expensive individual items. The price of tulip bulbs, as I said, started out relatively expensive, and it got even more expensive. And a viewer could, Paul Taylor argues, kind of add up the value of a bouquet like this in their mind and think about that as another sort of aspect of appreciation for this painting. So already by 1614, people were starting to think that tulips were not necessarily a good buy. This is an engraving by Rumer Fisser coming from his book Sinnepoppen, which was a book of, losing the exact word, emblems, that's the word I'm looking for, a book of emblems in which he includes a picture and then some sort of a text next to the picture to explain the significance of it. And these were incredibly popular forms of literature. It was started in Italy, but then it came to the Dutch Republic in particular, and they just loved them there. So this was a very common form of expression for Dutch artists and for people looking at them. And this particular emblem reads, "A fool and his money are soon parted." So we're all familiar with that saying just as much as they were at the time. And so the implication is, of course, that you got to be a fool if you are buying this. So some bulbs were sold for really high prices, including ones that were equivalent to the cost of a small house or 3 years' wages for a master carpenter. And by comparison, it wasn't possible to buy a painting for that price. There weren't, paintings were never got that expensive. So the prices, let's go back to this, prices for the bulbs kept going up. So people kept buying them. We're familiar with this, right? From all of the different bubbles that we've had. Go ahead, get that mortgage. The house prices are only going to get higher until they stop. This was really actually the first modern market bubble that we have then repeated over and over again. So one day in February of 1637, however, people started to question. They were like, maybe this isn't the best use of my money. And they stopped paying those prices. And it's unclear exactly why that happened, but the faith in the continued growth of the prices of the tulips collapsed. And it's possible because there was an oversupply. I mean, tulips keep growing, so you would have to sort of artificially stop them from growing. There may have been an oversupply of bulbs. So this painting by Jacob Gerrits Kaup, called A Bed of Tulips, was painted a year after the collapse in prices. And it seems possible to read it as a response to the collapse. Many of the flowers are past their prime. We've got some that have kind of exploded outwards, and the tone of the painting is dark. And there's an unusual emphasis on the soil from which the plants grow, and it seems to emphasize the kind of ordinariness of the plants. They're just plants growing from dirt, rather than rare blooms disembodied against a blank background. They're just flowers. So there are several unexamined myths about tulip mania that have persisted until really recently. One of them was that it brought down the entire Dutch economy. And that is not the case. The entire Dutch economy did come down, but it wasn't until later in the century and as a result of the invasion of the French. It also didn't even actually destroy any one individual. There was nobody who just completely lost everything and was left bereft by that. There were certainly people who lost money, but it was not disastrous. Another myth about it is that people from all walks of life had participated in it, that everybody was buying bulbs. But that is also not the case. It seems to have been largely this leafhebber community, this comfortable middle class, and within that, a remarkably small group of people that were actually affected by it. But it did obtain the tulip mania, this crash in the tulip prices, did create or obtained an outside place in the Dutch economy, or the Dutch culture. And Anne Goldgar, who wrote the book on tulip mania, called Tulip Mania, argues that originates from how it really called into question values of honor, trust, social standing, and even how value is created. Previously, before the onset of capitalism, prices, there was this concept of the just price, and that an apple cost what an apple cost. It didn't raise or lower in its prices based on supply and demand. It was just how much an apple cost. So this new idea of valuing things based on how few there are or how much you want it was itself a new thing. So citizens were also reeling from the previous year when the Dutch Republic had suffered a recurrence of the plague in which 10% or more of the population in some cities died. So it was already a delicate and difficult time, and so then to add on this weird thing where a certain corner percentage of the population got obsessed with tulips and then lost a bunch of money was kind of distressing. So the way that the tulips were sold was one of the reasons for this sort of confusing state of affairs. As you know, tulips bloom for about a week in April or May, depending on the variety of tulip you're looking at. This is when buyers could see the bulbs that they wanted, and they could even pay for them then, but they couldn't obtain them in that moment. The bulbs needed to remain in the ground for another couple of months. Instead, what the buyers did was made an agreement to buy a tulip and receive the bulb when they were dug up or lifted. And this was called the dry bulb period. And this was the point in which money was exchanged. So you could actually renege on the deal, although you had to pay a certain fee if you had decided that you weren't going to pay for the bulbs. But when you actually went to buy the bulbs, they had become virtually indistinguishable from one another. So you needed to really trust the person that you were buying from, and they needed to trust you that you were going to actually buy them. So you put them on a sale agreement too. You would sort of okay, I want to buy these tulips, and you would sign them. As the prices for tulips rose, you could actually then sell that agreement that you had with somebody else to buy those tulips for a little profit over what you had paid for it. So the idea of the somebody else getting a profit for you might then cause you to sell the same bulb to somebody else at that higher price. So things began to, you can see how this is like creating this sort of perfect context for all sorts of breaches in trust and ideals among the people. And it really sort of put a point of confusion to society. And tulip prices never rebounded. There was, again, later in the 18th century, there was a hyacinth mania, but that's outside of my area. You can look that up if you want to. Everything before 1700, that's what I say. Okay. So by contrast, flower paintings sold for high prices. And their prices did not depreciate. Generally, there was not a lot of change over time in the prices of paintings. And it also became how shall we say? It became a specialty for artists. Whereas earlier in the century, an artist like Savary, who we saw, he painted a few flower paintings. He also did some landscapes and painted horses and things like that. But it quickly became something that you really needed to devote yourself to because there were other people that you were competing against in terms of the accuracy of your depictions and the like. These paintings were sold on the open market. They were sold by dealers. You could sell them directly from your studio or at art fairs. You could also create large artworks or be commissioned to create a large artwork. And or for somebody lucky like Rachel Ruysch, become a court painter and have your artworks bought directly from, make large paintings and have them sold directly to that rich prince. So there was pretty much a formula for these flower paintings. You put the bouquet in the middle, and for especially these early flower painters, the emphasis is on very crisp, clear flowers. There's a general tendency to put the blue flowers towards the back of the painting and the red flowers towards the front. That helped create a sense of volume because blue has a tendency to withdraw, red come forward. And you would also put darker flowers next to lighter flowers to create what was called a checkerboard effect. And it would help sort of individuate the flowers. This style of flower painting has been compared to the style of group painting, group portrait painting that was done not exactly at the same time, but around the same time period, where you have a bunch of people that are all together and they're simultaneously part of a group, but also sort of individually spotlit. And each one of those people can sort of shine individually in that light. And the flower painting by Boscarts, for instance, very much has that quality. So this artist, Balthasar van der Ast, was one of Boscart's students. He had many students, and this was one of them. And he very much continues that idea that we see of that incredibly vivid clarity. He also includes a bunch of shells. And the flowers are coming out of this porcelain vase. So it's just a reminder that, again, the significance of collecting to this whole endeavor. So this artist, Jan Davids de Heem, trained with Van der Ast, and he introduces a bit of a different quality to his bouquets in that they are a little bit less perfectly clear. We don't have every single bloom individually shining in its own spotlight, and this one has been compared then to an effect like Rembrandt creates with his Night Watch from around 1642. So in some of those, some of the figures are in spotlight and the other ones are pressed into the back. So most important, though, for Rachel Ruysch were these two artists, Willem van Alst and Otto Marcius van Schreek, and both of them are represented in the exhibition that we have here in the MFA. And the two of them knew each other in Italy, and van Alst, as you can see, creates a sort of still has that clarity that we see of Bosgaard's, but it's without the kind of uprightness, shall we say, is kind of allowing these tumble-down effects of the flowers that we'll see Rachel Ruysch appreciating. And van Schreek, of course, was famous for these underneath the sottobosco, meant under the forest, on the forest floor paintings that kind of look like damp leafy areas, and accentuated here by that hungry frog. So Ruysch then takes some of these features from van Alst in her organization, her composition, but she also looked closely at van Schreek, emulating his use of moss as a means of paint application, which we're not seeing here, and the transfer of butterfly wings to depict butterflies. She also does include that, continue that moody lighting that was introduced by De Heem. We don't have, every single flower is not individually spotlit. It's kind of more solitary. I mean, it's more suppressed into a group. She also introduces a new and profound profusion of blossoms. I feel like that's the thing that is really the most distinctive characteristic of Ruysch in comparison to the other flower painters. And so while there's a sense of luxury that comes with this profusion, of course you can look at it and sort of think about the cost of all of the blossoms. You can just kind of revel in all of the different colors. I think there's another reason for that effect, and that is because she grew up in a rather strange household, as her father, Frederick Ruysch, made elaborate displays with human remains, featuring fetal skeletons posed in animated positions and waving around little pieces of membrane and things like that to create these sort of bizarre dioramas. So this is an engraving after one of those dioramas that he had created with actual body parts. And her compositions, I think, strongly resemble his in their construction, except for rather than these kind of unpleasant bodily things, the preserved membranes, the organs, the branching circulatory systems, she depicts the most beautiful aspect of life on earth, flowers. Just kind of translates and transforms these deathly, macabre images into something that is extraordinarily beautiful. Her pictures relate to collecting and luxury, but they also return us to the function of flowers as a promoter and indicator of well-being and plenty. I think of her almost like just sort of repairing the ill, maybe, of the sort of unpleasant things that her father was doing with these beautiful images. Her compositions, when you look at them from a distance, they're almost too complex to take in, and they invite the viewer to come closer and closer to her canvases to really appreciate all of the details of the flowers and the ways in which they're meshed together. And our eye becomes, as the 17th century art theorist Carl von Mander wrote of our experience of viewing paintings, it becomes like a bee moving from one point of sweetness to another. Thank you. Happy to take questions, but I think someone with a microphone needs to be here. Here comes a microphone.
I see a hand raised.
Hi, I think you said something about the transference of butterfly wings. I wonder if you could just elaborate on that.
The transference of what?
Butterfly wings?
Ah, yes. Have you been to the exhibition yet?
I have, but I didn't spend a whole ton of time in there.
You missed it. Okay. Yeah. So Otto Marcius von Schreck was the first one to do this, but he actually took butterflies, which, as you may know, they have their wings are sort of, plasticky. There's a better word for that, and the color is a very soft, almost powder, and he applied those to a sticky surface on the canvas and pulled it off and left the colors on the surface of the painting. And Rachel Ruysch does the same thing with some of her paintings as well. So they weren't actually painting all of that detail. They borrowed it from the butterfly.
I have two questions. One was, you mentioned that tulips had a scientific as well as an aesthetic use, and I don't know what the scientific one was. I'd be interested in that. And then also you talked about how flowers appearing in art that didn't have a religious significance or was fairly late. And I think you're probably talking about in the European context, right? Mm-hmm. Because I was thinking about the Ottoman Empire, or if you think about East Asia, flowers appearing much more often and more in a decorative, I think, sense. Is that right? I mean, or is that, it's a very different context, but you were really thinking about in the Western European context?
Yes, definitely thinking much more for the Western European. Although, of course, they did have the religious symbolism. Not tulips, they kind of came into the scene too late. Because a lot of that religious symbolism related to flowers was an effect of the medieval period. So the later ones, these exotic flowers coming from elsewhere, didn't have that symbolism. And then your earlier question about the scientific aspect of it, it wasn't there was a scientific application. They were just interested in them from a scientific perspective, particularly for the way that they changed and breeding them and propagating them in various different ways. Yeah. And fitting them into the taxonomy, such as it was before Linnaeus.
You cite in your notes, thank you very much for those, where everything is, but you don't mention where Bed of Tulips, the one that had all the separated tulips, that some of them were dying by Jacob Garrett's son, Culp.
That one got left out of your side list?
Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It just says Bed of Tulips in the date.
Oh, how abrupt. My apologies. Oh, do I remember where it's from? That's a good. I'm sorry, I missed the gist of your question. Let me see if I've gotten it in my. No, I did not. Sorry, I can. Yeah, thank you.
David, I got it. Yeah, all right.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I loved how you sort of started and traced the flowers back in history. I thought that was super useful to sort of think how it works in these different contexts. And I loved how you spent quite a bit of time on Van der Ast. And I don't really know the answer to this myself, but to what extent do you think that Ruysch is aware of these earlier precedents? Obviously, she was aware of the Haim who were right before her, But then the earlier generation, let's call them the inventors. So, for instance, Van der Ast uses the basket. And Rhode also, you know, at some point in the 1710s, she does a basket or two. Also, there's the idea of the pears, right? We have a flower painting with a fruit still life. I noticed Van der Ast did one for the royal family, the oranges. But they look so different. So what is your thought, having sort of seen Rhode and those earlier inventors? Is there a relationship, or is it just a coincidence?
I don't know. Flowers and baskets are something that do kind of occur together, so she could have come up with it on her own. I can't imagine, though, that as somebody with the kind of pictorial intelligence that she had, not being interested in what had come before. And, you know, these are still here with us now, so they must have been there, visible somewhere, some of them, at that time. So she must have seen them and in some sense reacted to them. So I think that trying to find possible similar motifs across them would be an interesting way of doing it. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. Thank you. All right. It's like, thank you very much. Have a great day.